Hey everyone, so today we are going to talk about the topic of absolutism, which is what our unit is going to really be about. So, to this point in history, we've talked through a couple things going on in Europe from the 1400s on, and that includes the Renaissance, which sparks changes in terms of how people think at a time in which the church is really dominating society, leading us into the Reformation, in which the Catholic Church splits, and the Catholic Church had really dominated European society. The Catholic Church splits into Protestants and Catholics, and this sparks a lot of upheaval within society, which is going to lead to this topic of absolutism that we're talking about today. And in terms of absolutism, this just refers to the type of monarchy, so kings and queens are what we're talking about, where the ruler has absolute power. They don't have to listen to a constitution like our president would have to. They literally can make up whatever rules they want. They have no one checking their power. They will rule until the day that they die, in most cases. And so, absolute power, again, is when these kings or queens have no checks to their power. They have no constitution, no Bill of Rights, no citizens or a parliament or Congress that can stop them from doing what that monarch wants. Now, luckily, a lot of the world has gone away from this at this point, but in the 16th and 17th century, or the 15 and 1600s, up until the 1700s, this was really, the type of power that dominated European society. And so, in addition to you know them having this much power, they might have power over things like the church. They might have power over parliament. They may have power over social leads. And in addition to that, they also believed that in a lot of cases that they had the divine right to be king or queen, that God had chosen them to lead. And so, whereas the Catholic Church had really dominated a lot of these countries where these monarchs ruled, now they were saying, just like the Pope would say, that they've been chosen by God to lead the Catholic Church, that they have been chosen as king or queen to lead the people. And so, this really rose up again in those 16 and 1700s when many of these monarchs across Europe carried this absolute power. So, some of the causes of this, really it boils down to what we've been talking about a lot of the year, and that goes back to this Protestant Reformation. So like we said, that's when Martin Luther posted his theses up on the church in Germany, and it sparked this revolution in terms of challenging the absolute power that the Catholic Church had at this time, where they dominated land sales, they dominated power. A lot of times, a king or queen could not rule without the express written consent of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church still held more sway in a lot of these different kingdoms throughout Europe. But after the Reformation, because what happens is that you see a lot of holy wars start to crop up where people are fighting over whether they are going to be more Protestant or Catholic based. And this really challenged the power of the Catholic Church. And some kings or queens who wanted to be more powerful than that church, they saw that this as a way to sort of take that power away from the Catholic Church and to, bring this under their their domain. And the power was also impacted by the fact that we had these holy wars. So we talked about the 30 Years' War, and this really affected the structure of society. In the case of the 30 Years' War, about 15% of Europe was killed in the fighting that occurred. And this challenged a lot of people's opinions on the power that religion would hold in society. And so you see kings and queens start to, again, step up into that role and to say, religion isn't quite working in terms of how we are determining the power within society. And so give that power over to us. And this leads me right into that next cause that's right there, and that's the idea of secularism. So we've talked about secularism a lot in the last few units, but secularism refers to any non-religious part of society. And before the Reformation, all of society was in some way tied to religion. There was not a thing within society that was probably happening within European society, at least, that was not in line with the beliefs of the church. And so, after the Reformation and during the time of the Reformation, people were starting to challenge this idea and stating what was under the domain of religion or religious studies and what was not. And so, you start to see people again break away from the church and the power becoming more rested in those leaders and those kings and queens that might be over an individual nation. The other one that I'm just going to talk about real fast is the end of the feudal system. And the feudal system was an economic system that dominated in Europe throughout the medieval times or the Middle Ages uh, up until the end of the Renaissance. So, getting us into the 16 and 1700s. And with the feudal system, a lot of people, or most people, worked as what were called serfs and were more of the servant class, where they would rent land from local nobles and dukes that were much more locally based, and they would work the land for a fee and make very little money. But as times changed, people started to uh, dispute this particular system and want more for themselves within society. And so this started to change European society. And so you go from smaller regional kingdoms where a duke could, more reasonably control the land and, you know, split up their land for people to work it into larger nations that we might know today, like France or England or Spain, which is going to increase the power of one person or one king or one queen. So, looking at an example of an absolute ruler from this time, and someone that represented the age of absolutism probably the best, was King Louis XIV of France. And King Louis ruled for 72 years from 1643 to 1715. 72 years. He became king when he was 4 years old, although someone sort of took the reins for a bit while he was a kid and still growing up. And over the course of time, what was happening within France was not only was there wars over religions, but there was also wars over who was going to truly control France. And so early in King Louis XIV's reign, there was a series of civil wars or a series of wars between different factions, different groups within France. And King Louis was able to gain more and more power over France by continuing to win these different wars. And so over time, he becomes, controlling not just of his particular group within France, but over the course of time, controlling the entire country of France, including colonies that are in the newly discovered Americas, um, within this time. And he really believed in something called the divine right of kings. And this is something that I mentioned a couple slides ago, where he believed that he was chosen to be king by God. And because he was chosen by God, that he was a representative for God, and that the people, the citizens of his country, those that were following him, could not tell him how to rule as God's representative would know best. And this is very, very similar to the argument that the Catholic Church would make. Let's say, for instance, that you are a pope or you are a cardinal who is a lower ranking member of the Catholic Church. You would say, I've been ordained by God. And so, therefore, you cannot question the word of God because what I'm speaking is the word of God. And so these kings and queens sort of took that message and shaped it into a new way. And, what sort of made Louis different in this time or so powerful was that he really crafted this message and that he demanded that full authority over the state of France. And so lower ranking officials really did not have the power that they would have under the feudal system, like I talked about, or under the Catholic Church when they dominated France. And so, because of all of these acts, he became known as the Sun King because he believed that everything revolved around him. Just like our solar system, he is the sun, he is the thing that everything else revolves around within this solar system. And so King Louis of France was quite an example of that. Now, another thing that made King Louis so special was his palace called Versailles. And Versailles is somewhere that you can still visit today. But what made this palace such an important thing for building his power was that in building up the Palace of Versailles in all its beauty and splendor, and I'm going to show a few pictures of it in a few minutes, he also built up a centralized place that all decisions were made in by him. And so, an example of how he was able to control power under this is that he would force local or regional nobles and other powerful people from around the country to come stay at the palace for long periods of the year. And so they are pulled away from their local people. And so the local people do not have as much allegiance to these people as they do the Sun King. And so for King Louis XIV, he was better able to supervise what they were doing. He was able to keep them away from developing greater power so that they would try to, challenge his authority within different areas of France. And he was able to really create a stranglehold on power within French society. And so under King Louis XIV, Versailles became the most beautiful palace in Europe. France became the richest country in Europe, or the wealthiest, although a lot of people did not necessarily experience this wealth. There was a lot of people who were in dire straits as well. And they were able to build up colonies throughout the world, taxing the people of France, trading with other countries and colonies. And in addition to that, they were able to build up France as really a center of art and culture that we still know it to be today. And so, because all of this work was commissioned for things like the Palace of Versailles, um, these were commissioned and ordered by King Louis. This led to France being one of these centers of the world in art and culture. And so here we see a couple pictures of Versailles, and you can just see the massiveness of the building from the outside on the left, including the very beautiful gardens that you can still visit today, and just see how beautiful it is. And then in the top right corner, we see just the very, very beautiful artwork that is across the particular palace, which, as we can see, is really, really massive. And it was so big because so many people were coming to live there for times of the year. This was really the government of France throughout this age of absolutism. Now, just finishing up our talk of the age of absolutism, the age of absolutism really led to the growth of power for monarchs in Europe, power that they did not enjoy up to this point, where the Catholic Church had formerly held power. Now these monarchs were holding power. And so, due to the Reformation, due to these resulting religious wars, these rulers like King Louis XIV of France were able to become the most powerful people in their countries, rule with total power, and over time, uh, this absolute power that they held became more and more challenged because people started to see the negatives of one person having so much rule. And so people began to challenge the nature of governments, challenge the nature of rulers, challenge this divine right of people to rule, that God was not choosing them, but that they rather became the most powerful reason for a powerful person in a country for reasons that were out of their hands and because the people had brought them there. And so more and more people begin to push for freedom and liberty, as we'll learn throughout the rest of this unit. And for the individual, that would later lead and eventually lead to revolutions like the one that creates our own country. All right. If you have any questions, please let me know. and have a great day.